In 1829, a London chemist named Samuel Jones started selling small wooden sticks dipped in chemicals that would burst into flame when struck. He called them Lucifers. He chose the name because they brought light. He did not know he had also chosen it correctly for another reason, because for the next 80 years, the people who made them would die in agony. Their teeth would fall out. Their jawbones would rot while they were still alive. In the dark, their faces would glow a pale green. Most of them were teenage girls. This is the story of how the most ordinary object in your home, the small wooden stick you barely think about, killed thousands of children, ignited one of the most important strikes in history, and helped create the modern labor movement. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button for more hidden histories of everyday objects. This is the story of the match. For most of human history, fire was not portable. If you wanted a flame, you had to either keep one burning constantly, banking coals overnight, hauling embers between rooms, never letting the household fire go out, or you had to start one from nothing. And starting a fire from nothing was hard. Flint and steel could throw sparks, but only into prepared tinder. The strikes had to land just right. The tinder had to be dry. The kindling had to be ready. On a damp morning in a cold house, building a fire could take 20 minutes of patient, frustrating work. Most people simply did not let their fires go out. The hearth was the heart of the home for thousands of years, not because of tradition, but because of practicality. The fire was too valuable to lose. The first attempts to make portable flame were strange and dangerous. In ancient China, sulfur-tipped sticks called fire-inch sticks appeared as early as 577 AD. They could be ignited by touching them to an existing flame, but they could not be struck. They were not matches. They were just thin bundles of wax and pine. In 1680, an English chemist named Robert Boyle discovered that white phosphorus, a substance that glowed in the dark and burst into flame in air, could ignite when rubbed against a sulfur-coated stick. It worked. It also caught fire on its own at room temperature, set people's pockets ablaze, and could not be safely stored. For the next 150 years, dozens of chemists across Europe tried to build a usable match. Each version was either too dangerous, too expensive, or too unreliable to sell. Then, in 1826, in a small pharmacy in the north of England, a chemist made the breakthrough by accident. His name was John Walker. Walker was a 45-year-old druggist in Stockton-on-Tees, a town in County Durham. He sold medicines, ran a small shop, and experimented in his back room when he had time. He had no formal scientific training beyond a pharmacy apprenticeship. He was, by every measure, an ordinary man. One afternoon, he was mixing a paste of antimony sulfide, potassium chlorate, gum arabic, and starch, testing a formula intended for use in firearms. He stirred the mixture with a thin wooden splint, and when he was finished, he set the splint aside on his hearth. A few minutes later, when he scraped the dried tip of the splint against his stone fireplace to clean it off, the splint burst into flame. Walker stopped. He looked at the flame. He looked at the splint, and he understood, in that moment, that he had just solved a problem that had defeated chemists for 150 years. He spent the next several months refining the formula. By April of 1827, he was selling his friction lights out of his shop in small tin cylinders, each containing 50 splints and a folded piece of sandpaper. To light one, you placed the match head between the folded sandpaper and pulled the stick through. It worked. His friends and neighbors were amazed. Michael Faraday, the famous chemist, heard about the invention and wrote to Walker urging him to patent it. Walker refused. He believed his discovery should belong to the public. He once said, "I doubt not it will be a benefit to the public, so let them have it." It was a noble decision. It also ruined him. Within 2 years, Samuel Jones, the London chemist, saw a demonstration of Walker's matches, copied the formula almost exactly, and patented his own version. Jones called them Lucifers, and he sold them across England. Walker continued making his original matches in Stockton, but at a price he could no longer compete with. By 1830, he had stopped production entirely. He died in 1859, aged 78, almost penniless. Samuel Jones became wealthy. In 1830, in France, a chemistry student named Charles Sauria made the change that would turn the match from a curiosity into a killer. Sauria was 19 years old. He was experimenting with the Walker-Jones formula, trying to improve the smell. The original matches had reeked of sulfur and produced unpleasant smoke when lit. He replaced antimony sulfide with white phosphorus. The result was extraordinary. The new matches lit easily. They burned cleanly. They could be struck against any rough surface, a wall, a stone, or the sole of a boot. They were cheap to manufacture. They smelled tolerable. They were also poisonous. White phosphorus is one of the most toxic substances ever used in industrial production. Even tiny amounts absorbed through the skin or inhaled as vapor accumulate in the body and attack the bones, particularly the jawbone. Once exposure begins, the damage is cumulative and almost impossible to reverse. Sauria did not patent his discovery. Within a few years, white phosphorus matches had spread across Europe and North America. They were faster, cheaper, and more reliable than anything else on the market. Match factories opened in every major city, and the workers in those factories, almost all women and many children, began to die. The disease arrived slowly. First, a worker would notice a toothache, a persistent, dull pain in the lower jaw that did not respond to any treatment. Then her teeth would loosen. Within months, several would fall out. Then the swelling would start. The lower jaw would begin to enlarge, distorting the face. The skin would discolor. In some cases, in dark rooms, the affected jaw would emit a faint greenish glow, the phosphorus deposits in the bone slowly burning. Doctors called it phosphorus necrosis of the jaw. The factory workers had a different name for it. They called it phossy jaw. The treatment, when there was any, was surgical. The dead bone had to be cut away, sometimes the entire jaw, sometimes parts of the skull. The procedure was performed without modern anesthesia, in unsanitary hospitals, on women who could not afford to miss a single day of work. Many refused treatment until the disease had spread too far to treat at all. In one Bryant and May factory in London, a study covering the years from 1882 to 1897 found that nearly 1 in 5 workers diagnosed with phossy jaw eventually died from it. The disease ate their faces, it ate their lives. And the factories knew, the owners knew, the shareholders knew. They did nothing. In England, the most famous match factory in the world was Bryant and May, located in the East End of London. By the 1880s, it employed over 1,400 workers, almost all of them young women, many of them daughters of Irish immigrant families living in slum housing nearby. Their working conditions were extraordinary, even by Victorian standards. Workdays ran 12 to 14 hours. Workers ate their meals at their workbenches, surrounded by phosphorus dust and fumes. The same dust settled into their food. Wages were extremely low, and they could be lower still, because the company imposed a system of fines that eroded what little the workers earned. A worker could be fined for talking, for going to the bathroom without permission, for dropping a match, for arriving late by even 1 minute, for having dirty feet. The fines often added up to a substantial fraction of a worker's weekly pay. Meanwhile, Bryant and May paid its shareholders dividends of over 20% a year. In 1888, a 41-year-old British journalist and social reformer named Annie Besant heard about the conditions at the factory. Besant was an unusual figure for her time. She was a writer, a Fabian socialist, an early advocate for women's rights, and one of the most prolific journalists in London. She published her own weekly newspaper called The Link. In June of 1888, Besant and a colleague named Herbert Burroughs traveled to the East End and stood outside the Bryant and May factory at the end of a workday. They asked the women coming out of the gates if they would talk to them. Several agreed. What Besant heard shocked her. She wrote up the interviews and published the article on June 23, 1888. The headline read, "White Slavery in London." In her opening sentence, she described the workers as undersized because underfed, oppressed because helpless, flung aside as soon as worn out. She named the dividends. She named the fines. She named the disease. And she ended with a single, devastating question. Who cares if they die, provided only that the Bryant and May shareholders get their 23%? The reaction was immediate. Bryant and May threatened a libel suit. They drafted a statement claiming the article was untrue and demanded that every worker in the factory sign it. Not a single worker did. 3 of the leading workers were dismissed in retaliation. The next morning, July 5, 1888, the entire workforce of 1,400 women walked out of the factory in protest. It was one of the most dramatic strikes in British history. The strikers were teenage girls and young women. They had no money. They had no organized union. They had no connections to political power. They had nothing except each other and the moral force of what had been done to them. They marched on Parliament. They held public demonstrations. Annie Besant raised funds for them through her newspaper. Suffragists like Emmeline Pankhurst publicly supported them. The press covered every day of the strike. After 3 weeks, Bryant and May surrendered. They agreed to rehire all the dismissed workers. They agreed to abolish the fine system. They agreed to provide a separate room for meals, a small but meaningful concession that meant workers no longer had to eat in clouds of phosphorus dust. The match girls had won. But the story does not end there. In 1891, 3 years after the strike, William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, opened a competing match factory in East London. His factory used only red phosphorus, which was non-toxic, instead of white phosphorus. The matches were called Lights in Darkest England. Booth's factory was not built to make money. It was built to shame Bryant and May. Booth invited journalists, politicians, and rival factory owners to tour his facility, see workers laboring in clean rooms with no toxic exposure, and watch matches being made safely. The pressure spread across Europe. Finland banned white phosphorus matches in 1872. Denmark followed in 1874. Germany did so in 1907. The International Burn Convention of 1906 banned them across most of the developed world. England held out. The British government argued that banning white phosphorus would constitute a restraint of free trade. They argued that the cost of switching to red phosphorus would harm British industry. They argued that the disease was rare and exaggerated, that workers' poor diets and hygiene were partly to blame, and that the matter was best handled by individual factories. White phosphorus matches were not banned in the United Kingdom until 1910. That is 80 years after Charles Sauria first added phosphorus to the formula. 80 years of bone disease, agony, and death in a single country for a product that cost almost nothing to replace with a safer alternative. And this is where the story turns. Most people never realize it, but the Match Girls' strike of 1888 was not just about matches. It was the moment when the modern labor movement was born. Before 1888, organized labor in Britain had largely been the territory of skilled craftsmen, printers, engineers, and carpenters. The unions of the era represented men with specialized trades, men whose skills gave them bargaining power. Unskilled workers, women, immigrants, the poor of the East End, they were considered impossible to organize. They had no leverage. They were too easily replaced. The Match Girls proved that wrong. Within a year of the Bryant and May strike, dock workers in London went on strike. They won. Within 5 years, gas workers, transport workers, and laborers across Britain were forming unions for the first time. The model, small, vulnerable workers banding together, leveraging public outrage, refusing to back down, became the template for what historians now call New Unionism. Annie Besant later wrote that the Match Girls' strike was the most important event of her life. She was probably right. Almost every major piece of British labor legislation in the next century, the Workmen's Compensation Act, the Factory Acts, the minimum wage laws, and the right to strike protections, descends from the precedent set by 1,400 teenage girls in the East End of London who refused to be silent about a disease that was killing them. You hold the result of that fight in your hand every time you light a match. The matches in your kitchen drawer today are made with red phosphorus. They are non-toxic. They are cheap. They cost about a penny each. They have been engineered, regulated, and standardized so completely that you almost never think about them. That cheapness, that safety, that invisibility, it was paid for in jaws. Faces, in young women who did not live to see 25. The match is, by some measures, the cheapest object you will ever buy. It is also one of the most expensive when measured in the currency that actually mattered. From a chemist's accidental fire on a stone hearth in Stockton-on-Tees, to a London factory floor where children ate phosphorus with their bread, to a strike that birthed the modern labor movement, every invention has a hidden past. And sometimes the most ordinary objects have the most extraordinary stories. The match solved one problem, but it created another. Because once industry discovered that it could maim and kill its workers in the open, in plain view of the public, and face no real consequences for decades, the question of we owe the people who make our things became one of the defining moral questions of the modern age. And the answer was not always given freely. Sometimes it had to be taken. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden story behind this everyday object, hit subscribe, drop a comment with what you'd like to hear about next, and tap that like button. Now take a look around. History is everywhere.